What's going on, everyone? This is Miles Dompierre, and welcome to Checkpoint, the show where we stop and break down all the biggest gaming news stories of the week so far. Joining me today is my good pal Jez Corden, and we have a lot to talk about. First up, after originally launching on the PS5 back in November of 2020, the once PlayStation exclusive Bugsnax is coming to Xbox and PC this April. To sweeten the deal even further, for Xbox fans, Bugsnax and its upcoming Isle of Big Snacks DLC are launching straight into Xbox Game Pass on April 28th. So Jez, are you excited for Xbox players to be able to experience this weird game?
I remember when Bugsnax was announced, like a bunch of Xbox fans were like, "Oh, this looks lame" and stuff like that. But I was thinking, like, it actually looks kind of cool.
I'm with you.
The books, it's bright, colourful, and one thing a lot of people say about Xbox is that they need more games that appeals to a younger audience potentially and stuff like that. So I'm all for it, you know. And bringing it to Game Pass drop some added value in there as well. So yeah, I'm going to check out Bugsnax.
Same. I got a PS5 at launch and I downloaded Bugsnax, but there was so much that came out around that time that I didn't get around to playing it. So it's one I definitely have been meaning to go back and revisit because I'm with you. I thought the game looked cool. It looked bright. It looked quirky. The trailers almost kind of hinted at some sort of dark horror elements leading up to it. So I was fascinated to check it out, and I will be checking it out in Xbox Game Pass. But something I want to talk about that's kind of introduced some interesting speculation regarding exclusivity windows is that for the most part, a lot of people assume exclusivity is a year, 6 months, and those are typically the figures that get thrown around. But when we're looking at Bugsnax, we're closer to 15 months on its exclusivity with PlayStation. So what I want to ask you is, do you think this means that games like Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo might see delays beyond 1 year exclusivity?
It's always hard to say because like every contract is bespoke and contracts can change and they can evolve over time. Like Final Fantasy VII Remake was supposed to be a year exclusive by Sony's own admission. And here we are, how many years now? 2 years out? And we still don't have Final Fantasy VII Remake on Xbox. And maybe we won't ever get my Final Fantasy VII Remake on Xbox. So, you know, it's hard to say without looking at the finer details on each and every single contract. But as pertains to Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, which are, you know, officially Microsoft IPs now, I guess we'll just have to wait and find out for ourselves. But could also just be the fact that Bugsnax wanted to avoid the Elden Ring wave. Maybe Microsoft was like, well, if we line in a Bugsnax, because obviously this deal must have been done a few weeks ago, a few months ago even. They're probably like, let's slip Bugsnax past Elden Ring, perhaps maybe into a quieter time, which is, I would say, April is definitely proving itself to be a quiet time at the moment.
Yeah, that gives Bugsnax plenty of time to shine. In some other big news this week, longtime support studio Affinity took to Twitter to state their intentions to deepen their commitment to Halo Infinite. We know they helped on development leading up to the launch of the game, but it now sounds like they will be a more integral part of the future of Halo Infinite. So do you think this is a smart move by Xbox and 343 to kind of lock them into helping bring a consistent flow of content to Halo Infinite?
Man, it's almost becoming a meme that certain Affinity's like coming in to save the day when it comes to Halo releases. Like I saw a lot of discussion around the fact certain Affinity was largely credited with rescuing the Master Chief Collection, which launched in a bit of a state as well back in the day. So increasingly it looks like maybe 343 biting off more than they can chew with a live service portion of Halo Infinite, and certain Affinity, as we know from our leaks back in January, they are working on some sort of battle royale-ish kind of mode for Halo Infinite, codenamed Tatanka, according to my information at least. So I think this is them basically confirming that information, and hopefully certain Affinity on board will see the pace of updates increase and hopefully meet people's expectations.
Yeah, it's a weird situation right now when you look at Halo Infinite and the community's response to the launch. And it will be nice if they can get people in place, even if it isn't 343 exclusively, to make sure that fans and players have consistent stuff to look forward to. And like you touched on, Certain Affinity has been kept very busy by Microsoft. It's rumored that they could potentially be working on Perfect Dark. We also talked about the Project Suerte codename, which is that team developing a Monster Hunter-like for Xbox as well. So there is a lot on the table for Certain Affinity when it comes to Xbox and Xbox first party. So Jez, a lot of people in the community are looking at the trends of Certain Affinity and saying, is Microsoft going to step in and take this relationship to the next level?
I think it has to be inevitable at this point. Like having remote studios that can support your teams and stuff like that, they became in like massive demand during the pandemic. And I think like even as we move back into the offices now and stuff and the pandemic, winds down, which everyone seems to have agreed the pandemic's over now.
Congratulations, guys, we did it.
Yeah. Yeah, whether it is or not, I'm not scientifically, authoritative enough to say either way. But as we move back into offices, for better or worse, having these hybrid working environments with remote tools and stuff like that, these support studios like Certain Affinity, they're already set up to do that. So obviously they come as a big help for games like Halo Infinite and stuff like that. And there was all those rumors that Cyberpunk's development was sort of hindered by the pandemic or not necessarily the pandemic, but like the lack of availability of remote studios supporting them and stuff like that, and a bunch of other games too. So, there's that whole aspect.
Yeah, Certain Affinity obviously has a good relationship with Microsoft. They're obviously very familiar with a lot of the studios, and Microsoft clearly has been very happy with their work. So it will be interesting to see what the future of Xbox and Certain Affinity looks like. But like you said, for now, we'll just have to wait and see how that all plays out. All right, Jez, another conversation I wanted to have with you on this episode of Checkpoint is regarding this sense of frustration I've seen boiling up from a lot of members of the Xbox community regarding Xbox and Japanese developed games. It's no secret that the Xbox platform for a lot of noteworthy Japanese titles isn't getting releases. And a lot of people have, started filling in the blanks as to why this might be. There's been a lot of pessimism. There's been a lot of extreme, passionate takes about what Xbox needs to do and what Square Enix and all these other companies need to do. But I wrote an editorial for Windows Central about this issue and my thoughts on the overall situation and, the past, present, and the way that maybe there's a possibility in the future where this is corrected. So how does Xbox solve its Japanese game problem and make the Xbox ecosystem more viable for Japanese developers and publishers?
I mean, this is a tough question, and it's like people paid far more than us have been working at Microsoft to answer for a long time. So there's multiple facets to this, and like far too many aspects to go into in like a relatively short amount of time. We'd be here for probably hours analyzing the situation as pertains to Japanese games on Xbox. But it's things like market share in Japan, which has improved. It's things like culture and having the business relationships in place in Japan between Microsoft and some of the bigger publishers out there, like your Sega for Atlas, and they have been improving, a lot in this area. Like we've seen Dragon Quest hit Xbox, and we've seen Yakuza hit Xbox and Game Pass, and obviously Game Pass is providing a vehicle to offset the risk that I think some Japanese studios and developers probably feel when they look at the Xbox platform and think, well, the footprint is so small in Japan, there's a lot of risk if we make this game port for Xbox and stuff like that. But Game Pass can potentially, with the upfront fee you get from Game Pass, that can offset some of that risk. So I think it'll just take time, and nobody wants to hear that, especially when it comes to Xbox stuff. It feels like everything we've been wanting for Xbox is the answer is you've just got to wait for it. You just got to be more patient. You've just got to wait. So yeah, I appreciate the frustration. I'm frustrated too, and I know you're frustrated with the Legend of Mana. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's the one that you always see me yelling about on Twitter, and I'm sure people are sick of seeing it, but I will not stop. All right, my mission will not falter. You bring up some excellent points. It is an incredibly complicated issue, and that was what I was trying to touch on with my editorial, because I've seen a lot of people simplify the situation and say, well, if Xbox just did this, for example, if Xbox just bought a bunch of publishers, then they could solve that problem. Or if Square Enix just put out ports, no matter how they sold or performed, that would solve the situation. And really, it's going to need to come to a point where Xbox and these publishers agree that this is beneficial for both parties and it makes sense. And like you said, Xbox has done a really good job correcting it. What's frustrating for me is that if you look at the past of Xbox, you look at the OG Xbox, early Xbox 360, there were so many good, compelling Japanese partnerships between Xbox and companies like Sega and Square and From Software even early on. And they locked in all these amazing exclusives and they built up all this momentum with the 360. And then all that momentum just nosedived with the Xbox One. And now they're in a situation where they're paying for that still. And they have to rebuild that trust, rebuild those relationships. And it's going to take time. Again, as you touched on, nobody wants to hear that. It's not fun. It's boring. And we don't want to have to wait years and years to play the games that we want to play. And that's why we're seeing more and more people say, I'm just going to go to Nintendo or PlayStation for this. And unfortunately, as that narrative gets stronger and stronger, it's going to make this situation even more difficult for Xbox to correct. But as we always say on the show, we'll just have to wait and see, y'all. We'll just have to wait and see. All right, Jez, now is the part of the show where we dive into community questions from you lovely folks on twitter.com. First up, Monkey vs. Tramps asks, will we be getting an Xbox version of the DualSense this generation? What do you think, Jez?
So are we talking about specifically things like force feedback and the haptic feedback kind of stuff that the DualSense has?
I think what a lot of people reference are the haptic triggers and basically HD vibration are the two main points of criticism when we compare PlayStation's controller versus Xbox's controller.
Well, I'm going to defer to my buddy Randall Thor19, YouTuber, very good. You should subscribe. One of his quote-unquote predictions is that Microsoft will release Elite controller with some of these features baked in, and I kind of like, I with Rand, it's hard to tell because a lot of his predictions seem to come true, in a sort of clairvoyant kind of way. So it's like, is this actually a prediction, Rand? Or do you just know? So, but for me, I'm kind of like, why, if you're going to add these kind of features for developers to use, why put them only in your most expensive controller? Surely they need to be in all the controllers to make it worthwhile for devs to use them. So I've certainly not heard anything myself about it, but I'm pretty sure Microsoft's looking at the DualSense with a bit of envy right now. A lot of the feedback about the force triggers and stuff like that has been very, very positive, and it's a key differentiator for PlayStation. And I'm sure developers would jump at the chance to bring those features to Xbox in their multi-platform games if, all the platforms had those features. So I can see it happening. I don't know for sure if it will. I haven't got any information about that, but I can certainly see it happening in the future.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a patent that was floating around that showed that Microsoft was at least experimenting with the idea of haptic triggers and additional vibration?
Yeah, there was. They had this sort of rotary mechanism for changing the tension on the triggers via software or something. I'd have to go and dig that up, but it does seem like something they're exploring for sure. And maybe we'll see it in the middle of the gen, or maybe they'll wait till next gen. But I think if they are working on it, we'll probably see it sooner rather than later.
I agree that if they are going to do this, I hope it isn't tied to the Elite Series 3, for example, because for one, that controller is going to be $250. Like they have every time they release a new iteration, it is dramatically more expensive. And like you touched on, the reason that the triggers on the Xbox One, which were innovative for the time, didn't catch on in the big ways because Xbox wasn't necessarily the market leader at that time. And now we're in a position where PlayStation, who's arguably, I stress here, the market leader, and a lot of the people are supporting those features with their games. It would be so much easier if Xbox and PlayStation were on the same page and support would just be universal. And that way, anybody who had a controller, no matter if it was on Xbox or PlayStation, could use those features. And I want to live in that world, Jess.
Me too. I want to live in that world too. And also, if they do bring it to Xbox, it means they'll also bring it to Windows. So you'll also get those features on Windows as well. And if they unify the APIs and stuff like that, hopefully, maybe even PlayStation and Microsoft can work together on that to bring those features to Sony's PC PlayStation games in the future. So
let's come together, guys. Let's work together. Let's make dreams come true. Next up, Barney Cujo asks, is Microsoft actively working on a new achievement system or new game DVR?
On the Iron Lords podcast, another friends of Windows Central, Iron Lords on ILP on YouTube, Iron Lords podcast, go and check them out. They had Jason Ronald, who's engineering lead at Microsoft, on the show, and they basically asked him this question a few months ago, and he hinted that the game DVR was going to see improvements throughout 2022. And that they were trying to get them in for 2021, but it slipped, pandemic again. So we should see improvements to game DVR this year at some point. When? I have no idea. And also with regards to the achievement system, they said a little bit more, if I remember right, and I'm paraphrasing, they said something a little bit more vague, like we've heard the feedback about the achievement system. I think for Microsoft at the moment, a lot of their sort of developer budget is going towards xCloud and improving xCloud and preparing xCloud for sort of a big public launch. Because a lot of people don't even know xCloud exists yet. They haven't been advertising it because they haven't got the polish and the servers in place to really bring it to a mass market right now. So a lot of the engineering, dev hours are going onto xCloud from what I understand and what I've heard. Achievement system doesn't necessarily make them any money. So I think for that, it's probably lower down the priority list, at least for now. But it does seem like something that they do want to address. And as for when, we'll just have to wait and see.
Ding! Yes. Yeah, it's one of those things where we have evidence that, like you said, Jason Ronald has come out and said that game DVR is a priority for the team and going into 2022. So we can infer that there are at least steps in place right now to address the issues and concerns that fans have that have really, frankly, permeated the DVR since Xbox One. These are ongoing issues that are kind of part of that carryover from last gen that are still affecting the new hardware. And people are just kind of sick and tired of it. Again, people don't want to wait. And it has fairly been quite some time that people have had to deal with these issues. So hopefully that gets addressed soon. The achievement system, like you touched on, we don't have any sort of rough timeline for what that looks like, if that's happening. There are probably people behind the scenes thinking about what it could look like, but like you said, there are so many different priorities for Xbox right now as they grow and get people on board with the ecosystem. And as we've seen with the Switch, for example, who has no achievement systems, that's not what you need to succeed. The Switch is absolutely killing it without that feature, so Microsoft is probably looking at that and saying, that's not a selling point for a huge number of people when it comes to onboarding to Xbox. Clearly, it's a big deal for legacy fans. Achievements were a huge part of what made Xbox Live so amazing. But as we move into the bold new future, for some people, they just don't care. And so I think Microsoft knows that, sadly. Finally, Aviv asks, will we get a handheld Xbox console? And when? This is something we touched on kind of recently, but with the Steam Deck, with the One X player, with all of these handhelds coming out of the gate, people are re-looking at that and saying, all right, Xbox, we know you're doing xCloud, but are you going to give us a dedicated X-Boy? What do you think?
X-Boy. I think the answer to this is yes. I believe personally, my soul, that we will get an Xbox handheld eventually. And, I've heard they've been prototyping Xbox handhelds and experimenting and exploring. Of course, like I always tell the story about the Surface Mini. Microsoft had the Surface Mini ready to ship from the warehouse and they cancelled it at the last second. So prototypes don't necessarily mean products, They prototype a lot of stuff. Microsoft Research, they're always experimenting and trying new things. Will they actually do it? I don't know for sure. But I believe they will. Because it really fits in with their strategy of bringing Xbox where people are, where they're on the go and stuff like that. Nintendo Switch has been a massive, massive platform, and as console and computer hardware gets more and more mobile, it starts to stand to reason that the consoles will shrink. And also we have cloud, so they could make just a dedicated cloud handheld, because a lot of the solutions for xCloud right now, they're not the best. They're kind of clunky. You have to take extra peripherals with you. You have to drain your phone's battery if you want to play games for any extended period of time. And if you're playing on 5G with xCloud, it will wreck your battery really, really quickly. You know, 5G is a battery hog, man. So, you know, a dedicated handheld, even if it was just cloud-based, to me makes total sense within Microsoft's strategy. You know, and I hope we see it. You know, would you be interested in such a thing? Because you're one of the few who have a Steam Deck right now.
Absolutely. The first time I booted up Sea of Thieves on my Steam Deck, the first thing I thought was, man, I want Xbox to have a handheld so bad. Because for one, my library of Xbox titles is just way bigger. Like, I have a decent number of Steam games, but compared to my Xbox library, it's so trivial, and being able to access those on this device at any time. Like you said, it's about going to where players are. And we've clearly seen a resurgence in handheld gaming, portable gaming. People want the option to play their games wherever they are. And sometimes your internet isn't always the best, so a cloud-only device, as great as it would be for some areas, I would love to see them really, really go in and just take the Xbox Series S hardware, that concept, and shrink that down into a handheld that gets the job done and runs games natively at that resolution and performance. That, to me, that's the dream. That is the dream. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Checkpoint. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, share it out, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff, and we will catch you next week. Take care, everybody.